Well, good afternoon. My name's Ken Jones, and I have the pleasure of being the Dean of the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University, and I welcome you here for this afternoon's session. Over the last 5 years, this school and this university has had the pleasure to hold a number of events in this forum. The first one looked at 13 billionaires and how they were changing the Canadian landscape. That was followed up by looking at Indo-Canadian entrepreneurs. We then had a session on sustainable mining, and we've had one on new governance models. And today we're very pleased to have a forum on entrepreneurship and innovation, really focusing in on this city. And to a large part, that vision of entrepreneurship, innovation, and by extension, how they can affect cities, has really been the mantra of Sheldon Levy's vision as president of this university. And together, they've helped shape the reputation of the school. So it's my great pleasure to call to the podium the president of Ryerson University, Sheldon Levy. Sheldon.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that introduction. Quite often, the way it's described is it's all about me, when it really is all about all of us together. But it's fair to say that I do believe that innovation and entrepreneurship and the success we can have as a city to become one of the world leaders is going to be about the young people and bringing them into the innovation agenda of our country. I've thought for quite a while that we've been leaving out young people, and it's about time to bring them into the core of the innovation strategies for our country. So this conference that is dealing with entrepreneurship, creativity, and building our city is very, very important to all of us. And for that, I welcome you to Ryerson today and want to say how pleased I am you're here. There's a number of people that are here that I just have to say a special hello to, and I ask you to acknowledge that. David Crombie has been at the... For those that don't know, David is an original Ryersonian, and from Ryerson he got the itch to become a politician, and that itch led him to being the mayor of our city, but his itch has never left Ryerson, and we've stayed very, very close. So David, it's great to see you here. Alan Broadbent, not long ago, I was hooding as a non-doc of the university, so we captured Alan as one of ours, and delighted to do that. And for our faculty and our staff that are here, and Nav, I see you here, welcome. But mostly, and as well, I should say, to the students that are here from York, Ryerson, and U of T, and for those students, I've been part of your homes one time or another in my career because I spent wonderful years at each of those universities, so I want to welcome you here as well. Now, normally, I would say, so that's my job. I've said my piece and I sit down, but given the topic, I said, could I say a few other things? And they acknowledged that I might be able to do that. And so tomorrow I'm giving another speech, and it's at the Mattamy Athletic Center. It was once called the Maple Leaf Gardens. You might know it, and it was the home where the Leafs used to win the Stanley Cup and still might. In any event, I thought it's on much the same subject. So I thought I'd give you a tiny preview of some of the things that I wanted to talk about there. And if you happen to be there and you see it for a second time, pretend that it's interesting the second time as well, I hope. In any event, let me begin by the statement that's in front of you. It's from The Economist, and it says, the challenges ahead for countries will be learning how to extract the maximum economic and other benefits from digital technology. And if you think digital, you might think, well, isn't that Silicon Valley? And you might even think of another location. You might not recognize that Canada has now got the fourth most startups in the world now, behind only 3 cities, including the Valley, New York, and London. Then it's Toronto. So we have the 4th most startups in the world. But starting up and becoming successful are 2 different things. So I want to just share with you, here's one city you could admire in many, many ways. But New York is positioning itself in every which way to transform itself into the innovation city. If you're down in New York, you see everyone behind innovation in that city. It isn't driven by one person alone, it's a whole community that is moving to take a leadership role in the digital and the startup innovation. If you go to London, you will see that the largest financial startup capital is now in London, where the banks have adopted one of the largest startup incubators in financial services. If you go somewhere else, you could see that Seoul is with digital media and starting a whole city in digital. So when you look at this, and I begin by saying Toronto has the 4th largest number of startups, it does say to me that if we could pull together as a city and be able to create a plan under which all of us participate, and this is not only the universities, not only the government, but the private sector, the public sector, and everyone, we could become one of the most important areas for innovation and entrepreneurship on the planet. So these are some of the facts I mentioned before, but before I end, because I don't want to give you the whole speech, I'd like to say the following. We have now, I'm going to say it, I don't know if the data is quite right, but if there's an incubator larger in Canada than Ryerson, I don't know it. It's about 45,000 square feet. In that little bit of time, we had a company there that was at, in fact, Instagram before Instagram was there. We have a company that came out of it that is now one of the largest photo sharing applications in the world. And in it, we have another company that will be highlighted at the event tomorrow, and I thought I would show it to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Hossein Ranama. I'm the founder of Flybits and Director of Research and Innovation of Ryerson Digital Media Zone in Toronto. My father used to work for a company back in the 70s called Control Data Corporation. He's telling me that computers used to look like this back then. But if you want to think about it, the way we are interacting with information these days really hasn't changed. We are still searching for data. We are going through menu items to find what we are looking for. But these devices, that a lot of us call them phones, I don't know why, are essentially sensors. They are supposed to sense and give us information when we need them. So if you think about how we use them, we download too many apps on these devices and take it with ourselves wherever we go, and again, follow the same paradigm to search and activate applications on our devices. So what we have done is that we are trying to bring relevance to mobile users. A lot of people have tried that already. They are imposing infrastructure, instrumentation, integration to allow spaces and buildings to go smart. That model is not scalable, and it's very, very costly for a lot of entities to commit to. So what we have done, we have used the principles of crowdsourcing and ontology generation to allow people to turn geographical spaces into context-aware units. So our model is that to decentralize the App Store process, every single building in the world can become an app store that can deliver applications and information to people when they need it. So those stars that you see are ontologies. People can quickly build those ontologies, assign it to a location, and engage people into this immersive experience that they can walk from location to another location, and certain relevant applications will show up on their handset. So instead of me downloading the apps and carry it with me everywhere I go, I store them in the cloud, go to that context zone, and the applications will show up on my handset. So think about some examples. At a train station, take your application, and without you searching for it, we will navigate you to your platform. Take the same application to another context, like an airport, and then we will tell you that it's better to use augmented reality because you don't have time to go through a lot of menu items, and then we will show you where your gate is. So if all of us are at an airport, we will get very different information on our devices. So ladies and gentlemen, I think there is a light at the end of this tunnel, and that's a mobile world which information is very relevant and tailored for our needs. Thank you very much.
That was given at MIT when Hossein was named one of the top 35 innovators in the world by MIT. He was then, the Smithsonian recognized the technology that he's talking about as one of the top 6 technologies for 2013. And the reason I say that is that in this audience, at your universities, at your colleges, you have other Hosseins. And if, as Toronto, we can figure out a way of keeping them in Canada, keeping them in Ontario, keeping them in Toronto, and building an environment around them to be the best in the world and successful, we will become one of the most important digital players on the planet. And so this conference, which is talking about building our city, has got to pay attention to all of us contributing to the young innovators to make sure that they stay here, they're given a chance to have a successful company, and we support them. So thank you, and the conference is extremely important.
Sheldon's showing you the life of a president. He goes from one meeting to another. So Sheldon, thank you very much for joining us this morning, or this afternoon. As Sheldon mentioned, I mean, this conference is all about competitiveness and making sure that this city remains as competitive as possible. I strongly believe that local economies are the key to being an international player. And too many times, I think business schools have a global focus. Nothing wrong with that, but we often forget the local. And this particular school, given its location and given its curriculum, has to be linked very, very close to its local market, if you want, its local employment base. To start framing the conversation for the discussion about competitiveness, I have the pleasure to introduce John Farrow. John and I met, I guess, for the first time about a month and a half ago, talking about this conference. I think we both were immediately struck about how we sort of interacted in terms of ideas and exchange of ideas. And it became very evident to me that John would be the perfect person to start the conversation for this afternoon's symposium. John has an impressive background. His MBA is from Schulich. Make no apologies about that. He has an undergraduate degree in planning from Oxford Polytechnic in Britain. He is a professional planner who really runs a consulting firm, the Lee Holdings Group, or the Lee Group Holdings. And it's involved with a whole array of international projects. I think, John, if I read the documents right, you're in 8 different countries. You deal with transport, you deal with civil engineering, you deal with urban planning, and most of all, I think John's focus is on city management. He's also had a series of private, if you want, experiences with large companies ranging from BMO to Spar Aerospace to Honda to GM. So John brings to the discussion today a whole range of talents, and to simply add to that, he's also chair of the Canadian Urban Institute. And I'm proud to say that this conference is co-sponsored by the Canadian Urban Institute. So I bring you to give the keynote address, John Farrow. John?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be invited here to talk to you this afternoon. And it's also a great honor because following me is a star cast of presenters who I am humbled by when I read their resume and because I know their background. So it is a pleasure and an honor. But this is a conference about innovation. So we've got to do something different. In a conference about innovation where we're full of a room full of Husseins, where people are innovators, we've got to do something different. And what I'd like you to do is not sit here this afternoon listening to these speakers in a passive way. And what I want you to do is think of an innovative idea that's triggered by their presentations. It's unlikely to be triggered by mine, but it's probably be triggered by theirs. So I want you to be a room full of innovators. Oh, and by the way, this is Ryerson University, and yes, there will be a test. And the test comes at the break when you meet me. I'm going to ask you what your ideas are. So your challenge is to come up with an innovative idea about how to make Toronto and the GTA a better place for innovators in the future. Let me start with two quotations. And I first want to draw the distinction between creativity and innovation. And Theodore Levitt, one of the great thinkers about marketing and competitiveness, said, creativity is thinking up new things, innovation is doing new things. If we're going to be successful in the GTA, it's not about thinking, it's about thinking, then doing. So I'm going to pick this theme up later. Next, another great thinker, Peter Drucker, which said that innovation is the instrument of entrepreneurship. It's the act that endows resources with a new capacity to create wealth. So again, we want innovation that is designed to create wealth and in fact bring this wealth back to our city to make it a more successful city. I'm going to run through these themes in my talk here. My purpose is to persuade you that a commitment to innovation and entrepreneurship is essential if the GTA is going to compete effectively in a changing global economy. You heard the headlines just now from Sheldon. I'm going to take you down into some of more of the basics. And I'm going to do this in the following way. I'm going to first talk about the changing global economy and the challenge it presents. It's not just about New York. It's not just about London. The challenge is a lot bigger than that. Secondly, I'm going to talk about some directions in which we need to change, and this might be where you might come up with your innovative ideas, because I've just got a few, and you're probably going to have a lot more. And then I've got some thoughts about the approach that we should have going forward. So, the first thing we've got to recognize is the world's changing much more dramatically than we think. Up until the Second World War, the center of economic and political activity was Europe. Since the Second World War, it's moved here. But since the late 90s, the center of economic and political activity is moving to Asia, to India, to China, and to Indonesia, to the Pacific. And this is important for a number of reasons. And let me just highlight what some of those things are. This change is going to mean that the emerging economies, you can see them listed there, are going to grow larger over the next 30 or 40 years than the established economies. One forecast is that in 40 years, they're going to be 50% larger. That's important to us. As innovators, as thinkers, as thinking about how to position the GTA. This economic growth is going to be due to population and labor force changes. But it's not just about markets, it's also about the ability to deliver goods and services. I think we're going to see pressures coming out of this, and we're going to have a tendency to want to protect ourselves, to introduce protectionism. And you see it already You see it in the elections in the United States, you see it in elections here, you certainly see it in Europe. And this is not an environment that's particularly conducive to innovation, so we've got to strive against that. The other thing is 2/3 of the population is going to live in cities, which is interesting when we think about it from a market point of view, but it means we're going to be competing against groups of innovators in other cities around the world. So, it's not just about the numbers. Emerging economies are gaining characteristics that favor innovation. To date, circumstances have favored us. In the future, they're going to favor these other economies. So what does that mean? We're going to have to work harder. They're going to favor those other economies and those other cities because the size of the market is larger, more opportunities. The growth is more rapid, more opportunities. On the other side, on the supply side, there's going to be a young urban workforce. If you look at the statistics, the aging of the North American population, of the Canadian population, looking at it relative to somewhere like India, is dramatic. We heard about how innovation's got to be with the youth and the universities. There's a big responsibility you students have. There's few of you relative to the competition, therefore each of you have got to come up with more ideas. I'll be checking at the break. And also there are going to be growing pools of investment, so we can see how sovereign wealth funds begin to reshape the world, and it's going to be a lot more than that. And we've got to innovate faster than the competition. We've got to out-innovate them just to stand still economically. So, that's the challenge. How should we respond to that? I've got some suggestions about the direction we might take. We know, everybody learns in business school and everything else, it's common sense. If the circumstance is changing, we have to change. The competition is changing, so we have to change what we do. When you're in the class, in school, when you're in the office, wherever you are, the way we did it yesterday isn't good enough tomorrow. I mean, it's interesting when you look at organizations, successful organizations like Boeing. Boeing goes to its suppliers and they say, we need these components, and they've got to meet these specifications. In fact, what Boeing asks for from its suppliers is components that haven't yet been invented. They give them the specifications, they give them a time frame, they give them support, but they demand of all their suppliers innovation. I think we've got to develop a community which demands of each other innovation. I don't see in government procurement or city procurement or anything like that the demand for innovation in the supply of services. I think we need to think like that. And we need to do it because we need to recognize the importance of the economy to the future of the GTA. And we've got to take responsibility locally for its success. With the largest urban area in Canada, we've got one of the biggest concentrations of brains. We can't look to the others to support us. We've got to take responsibility for our own success. If we're going to do that, we've got to understand, via conferences like this, by your outward-looking attitude, we've got to understand the importance of innovation and entrepreneurship to economic success, and we've got to commit to it. Because it's a business school, I can say this very comfortably. If you're going to manage something, you've got to measure it. If you're going to measure something like this, we've got to benchmark ourselves against the competition. So we've got to look out, and we haven't got to benchmark ourselves against Winnipeg or Montreal or whatever. We've got to benchmark ourselves against leading cities in the world. Some thoughts about benchmarking. It's useful, but the way I've seen we've used it in the past is not very encouraging. We use it to celebrate our success. And that's great. We should celebrate our success. But we've got to be balanced in looking at the results. The GTA is a marvelous place to live, but we've got to ask ourselves, how are we going to be better economically? Many cities, when you look around the world today, have fallen on hard times while they've been busy celebrating their past successes. I mean, it's not just what's happening in Europe. You can see it all around North America as well. Success is not guaranteed. Success has to be worked for. It has to be earned. And some of the success we're enjoying today is built on the visions of people in the past. People like David Crombie and Alan Broadbent who thought about the future way back. And we're enjoying some of the benefits today. It's our job now to think about what we do to make the future better. Part of that is not believing our own publicity. The tendency says, oh, you know, we're in the top 10, we're in the top 8, we're in the top whatever in terms of good places to live. That's great, but that's the result of what we did yesterday. What we've got to do is invest effort and time to make sure we're enjoying those benefits in the future. So it's not just benchmarking about quality of life, though that's important. We've got to think about critical areas. I haven't got all the critical areas we should look at, but here are some facts. They're not all benchmarks, but there's some facts that I found challenging. The GTA ranks 67th amongst world metropolitan areas in terms of GDP per capita. 67th. That's not particularly good. I mean, it's the sort of thing you expect if you're a supporter of the Maple Leafs. But it's not the sort of thing, anyway, it's not where we want to be. And it's not all about money. It's because this is not the money you take home. This is gross domestic product. It's a measure of your productivity. We rank 67th in the world in terms of metropolitan areas, in terms of our productivity. We've got to be better. The others are getting better. They're getting better fast. We've got to get better faster than them. Another fact I just couldn't resist pulling out. Fraser Mustard, 20 years ago, was talking about the importance of early childhood education. A Toronto son, a Toronto thinker, a leading thinker, he was talking about the benefits and the importance of early childhood education. Do we have it here like that? There's places like Belgium that start full-time education for 2.5-year-olds paid for by the state. It's not us, it's them. Fraser Mustard had these ideas, we didn't pick up on them. It's not about thinking, it's about doing. Something that's close to my heart, because my company did some of the early work on it. In Delhi, it took 16 years to build 190 kilometers of metro railway and they got 142 stations. Frankly, we were very skeptical it would get done. They've amazed us, and they've done it. What have we been doing? We're still trying to decide whether let's move is the right thing. We're still discussing how to fund it, etc. They've done this with less resources, less skills, and they're not as far up the learning curve. So it's a challenge for us. We've got to benchmark ourselves against that. I was very fortunate that Sheldon actually had the same number as me in terms of we're ranked 8th in the world as being friendly to business. There's always a danger that you come up with something else. But I look behind those numbers. There's no Asian cities on the list. I think in 5 years there will be, and it's going to be hard for us to maintain that 8th ranking. So we've got to think about the benchmarks and the critical things about our competitiveness. The other thing I want us to think about is how thinking about competitiveness has changed. Corporate strategy has moved from the BCG models of strategic planning towards strategic management and continuous improvement. When I look at cities, I don't see that their strategies have changed that much when you look back over the last 20 years. When I visit different cities, and I go in a lot of cities around the world, their strategies are poorly differentiated. They all look the same. They all talk about high-value jobs, high-tech, pharmaceuticals, etc., attracting talent. So the strategies are poorly differentiated. There isn't an abundance of fresh ideas. What Ken Jones said about the need for business schools to get involved in this, it is critically important. I've been sitting there for 20 years looking at how there's always a new business school every month talking about competitiveness. Where are the new schools talking about city competitiveness? It's critically important to our future, but we're not investing enough on the academic side there. When we look at these strategies, they're all about what and not much about how. The result is very little investment and not much gets done. The strategy gets done every 5 years and just reaffirms that we should try and do what we failed to do last time. If we don't do better at this, if we don't change, change is going to be thrust upon us, and the crisis is going to be painful. It might not be painful for people in this room, but it's going to be painful for the more vulnerable members of our society. So we've got a responsibility, not just to ourselves, not just to our new generation, but to the whole community. So I think I want you to take that responsibility very seriously. As I said, thinking about competitiveness has moved from strategic planning to strategic management and to continuous improvement. So I came up with a notion here about what you need to do to build sustainable competitive advantage for the GTA. And I called it strategic serial innovation. It's strategic because the innovation's got to be focused. It's not just innovating on anything. It's innovation focused on those market opportunities that I showed you earlier, which are in China and India and Indonesia and around the world. We've got to link our innovation to those markets and those market opportunities. It's serial because it's got to be continuous. One innovation is not enough. We need more and more and more. And the innovation has got to be value added. It's got to be something that's worthwhile. It's got to make people want to buy our traded goods and services. In the corporate world, we talk about creative destruction. We can't use that in cities. It's too painful, the social costs are too high. But we can engage in creative change. So we should think about creative change because we've got to change this community over time to become more innovative and more competitive. Here's some parts that I think fit into strategic innovation. And part of that is building an entrepreneurial culture. We've got to recognize that we need to succeed in the global marketplace, and this takes innovation. We've got to embrace that idea. Innovation involves change. Change is painful. It has a cost. We've got to embrace it. It's going to be easier for the younger ones in the room. It's going to be a little bit harder for the people of my age. But we've got to embrace that idea of innovation, entrepreneurship, and change. We've got to attract more creative and innovation talent. Richard Florida says this is a great place for creative people. I travel a lot. I stay in a lot of hotels, too many hotels. What strikes me when I'm traveling in India or I'm in Africa, who do I meet recruiting top graduate students from their universities? I meet two groups of people. I meet the Australians and I meet the Brits. I don't meet any people from Toronto. I don't meet even any people from Canada. I don't even meet people from the United States. If we've got a great place for creative people to live, we've got to get out and sell it. They're not going to just come here by themselves. If you look at Singapore and places like that, they've got all sorts of programs designed to attract talent to their city. We need programs, talent, and marketing strategies to attract talent here. We've got a great place to live. We need to sell it. We need to build a culture where competing for success is celebrated. Again, I go back to India. Anyone who's traveled in India will know they've seen the billboards that are in all the cities with the photographs of the top students. Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so was the third in the class, was the fifth in the class, has just got a place at this university. Success is celebrated. India is a very cooperative society, but they're cooperative on one level, and they celebrate success at the other. We've got to get that balance of cooperation and celebration of success right, because we need more successful people to be innovative entrepreneurs. Also, we've got to create more vehicles that link our community resources together. Business, academia, investors, government. Do it in different ways and good ways. Mars is great, but we need 4 or 5 other Marses around. And we need other vehicles that are different from Mars. So we've got to find ways of mobilizing these resources in innovative ways. For those who are busy still reaching for that innovative idea they haven't come up with yet, here's something for you to work on. We've got to strike the balance between celebrating our strengths and striving to respond. When you run a company, you know you've got to encourage the staff by saying, hey, we did great, etc. We've done well on this, but we've got to strive harder because tomorrow it's going to be harder. We've got to get that balance in society. It's much more difficult as a whole community, and I bet David Crombie's got some ideas about how you might do that. And last of all, we've got to commit to invest in and nurturing innovation and entrepreneurship. We've got to put effort and we've got to put money into this. This is not something that we just comes about by just thinking about it. We have to put money and effort into it. So, what we need is a new approach where there's commitment to putting effort into the future of the community, because the future is very important. Let me just finish with something that stayed with me over the last 15 years when I met with the Mayor of Antwerp. When I asked him how he dealt with the volatility in Belgium at the national level, he said, in this city we don't worry about that. Countries come and go, but cities go on forever. Well, Antwerp's been in 4 different countries in its life, and we can't afford to be distracted from success by looking at what's going on at the national level. I think that's the sort of approach we've got to take here. And I think we've got to take it because success has to be earned, so we need to invest the effort and resources into making this a place where our grandchildren want to come and live with us. I want my grandchildren to come and live here with me. I hope you do too. Thank you very much.
John, thank you very, very much for that, and I think it was a great kickoff to the session. I'm not going to speak very much because I think we're here to hear the panelists, but I couldn't help but think that when John put up that last slide, cities go on forever. Clearly there's a group of global cities, and those cities change. And if Toronto is not part of that global network as it emerges, we are in trouble in this country. Our social systems are in trouble, our economic systems are in trouble. And to be part of that global network, I firmly believe we have to work as partners in this city. It's a collaboration of government, it's a collaboration of industry, it's a collaboration of universities. And my concern is, and hopefully this conference will slightly change that the business schools have not been part of that discussion. And I think it's essential they are. So given that little bit of, I suppose, statement of what I really believe, I'd like to give some attention to the program, and we have 2 wonderful sessions planned. One is building an entrepreneurial culture, and the other one is securing Toronto's future in the global economy. And they do fit, I think, very much with what John was talking about, and I think they certainly lead up to starting the discourse, hopefully over a number of years, of how we can all work together. So I'd like to call to the stage David Crombie. I'm getting back at David, you see. When I started here as a faculty member many years ago, David was just starting his bid for politics. And when I first came here, I was told, Ken, you have 18 hours to teach. And by the way, would you mind doing 2 hours of seminars for Professor Crombie? Because in effect, he's starting his campaign. And so my 18 hours became 20, and I've been waiting all these years to sort of have David work for something I've developed. So David, please come to the podium. You have a group, and it's a delight having you here, sir.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Ken. He did a great job in those 2 hours. The 2 extra hours actually made him a better teacher. It was terrific listening to you, John, and Sheldon earlier. What struck me, however, was the kind of warnings that if we don't do things, we're going to be left behind, and Ken was leaving the same message. Luckily, we have some panelists who have not paid attention to the fears because they've been engaged in the doing. and I'd like to ask him to come forward now. I'll do a quick introduction. I know you've had an opportunity to look at their bios, and you would know many of these people. I'm going to start with, right there, sorry. I'll start with Alan. Alan Broadbent, of course, has had a career of combining a business and commercial instinct with his philanthropy, with his understanding of city building through the Maytree Foundation. And many of you may know the Maytree Foundation. It works its wonders through the city in a variety of ways, and it's a pleasure to have him here. If you'd like to walk into the future, your very first visit to the Ryerson's DMZ, the Digital Media Zone, that's your first acquaintance with the future, and you'll run into Valerie Fox, who, even when you meet her quietly and informally, she's just constantly talking about the latest innovation. So it's a pleasure to have her here. And at the end of the podium is Tim Jones of Artscape in this city is probably certainly better than rare and probably unique, because he combined our interest and our understanding of the art world with how to make it creative and a commercial enterprise at the same time. He has more projects going on than I have kids. At any rate, he is fantastic. And this is our panel. I'm going to start off asking each one of them if they would not mind just offering 5 or 6 minutes of telling their story or a story they'd like to tell. Then we're going to have a discussion, and then we'll come back to questions with you. Alan, let me start with you.
Well, thanks, David, and thanks, Ken, for the invitation to be here today, and thank you all for coming. I really wanted to talk about entrepreneurship in a broader way than I think we normally talk about it. We usually, when we're talking about entrepreneurship, focus on sort of heroic business people that you find on the front pages of the paper or the report on business, or the great tech innovators who have come up with a great new kind of technology innovation. My sense is that entrepreneurs really exist throughout society, and we find them in government, we find them in institutions, we find them in the labor movement, and we find them in the non-governmental organization community. And I want to focus a little bit on the NGO world, which is a world I know reasonably well, because I find that a lot of entrepreneurship exists there because of the necessity that comes about because of scarce resources, so in effect, necessity is the mother of invention in the NGO community. And I find that despite this scarcity environment, that NGOs are often very resourceful. They're also durable and inventive, and we have these extraordinary survival cultures. We hear of business entrepreneurs who in the startup phase of their business will not take their paycheck. They'll skip a paycheck in order to keep the enterprise going and keep the scientists in place or the innovators in place, whatever the key drivers for that business startup are. This is normal behavior in the NGO community, that missing a paycheck, everybody taking less of a paycheck in order to keep the lights on and keep the doors open for clients is a normalized behavior. So they'll devote themselves in whatever way to the success of the enterprise. And it strikes me just in thinking about it, Ken, that business schools traditionally have situated themselves at the intersection of capital and power, and it's interesting to see more and more business schools now situate themselves at the intersection of community and capital, and I think that's a good change and a change that I celebrate. I wanted just to talk about a couple of innovations that I think are interesting. I actually have a list of them, so you cut me off when I'm getting up to my time. But I don't know how many of you know the radio station Jazz FM, how many of you are jazz fans. Jazz FM started here at Ryerson back about 50 years ago, more than that. It started in 1949 as the campus radio station, and known as CJRT. And the JRT stood for Journalism, Radio, and Technology, which were three of the main focuses of Ryerson at that time. And it operated as the campus radio station for quite a while until the costs of it started to get beyond what the university wanted to pay. And sometime in the 60s, the Ontario government stepped in with funding to keep it going. And CJRT at that point transformed itself into a nonprofit corporation. And it was funded 60% by Ontarians and 40% by donations from listeners primarily. And in the mid-90s, the Harris government, the Ontario government, decided to cut the funding, and CJRT was really left with a problem. The type of radio license they had limited them to 4 minutes per hour of paid advertising, and even part of that 4 minutes was not normally full commercial paid advertising. So they had a really strict revenue limit put on them by their license. And so the cutbacks and the constraints would have made most people just abandon the license, and that happens from time to time. That people will just decide to give up their license. But the interesting thing about CJRT is that they didn't. They had become known as Jazz FM at that point. And one of the things that kind of spurred them on to not give up was that they got an immediate reaction from listeners who were angered by the Harris cutbacks, and their donations started to go up quite dramatically. But more importantly, I think the board and management decided to pursue sustainability by becoming leaders in the world of jazz, not just locally as the favored jazz station, but they wanted to become world leaders in terms of jazz. They started by creating a strong presence in the local community through things like their youth big band, which still operates. High school students from grades 8 to 12 form one of the best big band jazz ensembles in the city, probably the best, I would think. And then they took up a whole educational mandate as well, really going back to their roots as CJRT. And for instance, they're currently doing a series on immigrant musicians and the journey they took to get to Canada. And two of the first episodes, which will be aired shortly, are on the brilliant pianist Robbie Botos, who's a Roma from Hungary, and the wonderful singer Sophie Millman, who's a Russian Jew. A few weeks ago at the annual Jazz FM fundraising concert, Jazz Lives, the brilliant international star guitarist Pat Metheny told the audience that Jazz FM is unique on the planet for its quality and its devotion to jazz. The presence of Jazz FM is now international due to its decision to be present on the web through a great app that it has. And I've tuned into Jazz FM in Delhi, Amsterdam, Auckland, and Buenos Aires. They have succeeded in taking a moribund local radio station with severe commercial constraints and putting together a strong community of international donors from Tokyo to Moscow, a group of business sponsors who sustain them, and enthusiasts, and they've made it a robust center of jazz internationally. The Jazz board is chaired by Bernie Weber, who has overseen much of this entrepreneurial behavior, and it's accelerated under the current CEO, Ross Porter, who many of you will know as a legendary Canadian broadcaster. So that's one example. Do I have time to embark on a second
Keep going.
one? One of my favorite organizations that we had a role in funding some years ago is called the Canadian Organization for Development Through Education, or CODE. And it was founded in 1959 by a group of Torontonians from the beach. You probably know Roby Kidd and a number of the others who were involved in that.
And his great son, the runner.
That's right, Bruce Kidd, our great runner. And they started off in the late 50s and 60s by shipping used books. That started with books out of their church basement and their own personal libraries, shipping them over to Africa. And over the years, they moved from general books to textbooks, which would get shipped to local schools, mostly rural schools, and then from just used books to remaindered books from publishers, books that had some kind of flaw that made it unsuitable for the Canadian market, but was still a very good book. And after a number of years, questions began to arise about the cultural relevance of these Canadian texts, what with snow and moose in schools in the middle of Africa. And so they began to focus on the writing of appropriate curriculum material in local languages by local educators. And this led to the requirement to print those materials, and then to the shipment of small printing presses and paper. And this proved a significant step forward in the quality of educational standards, but also led to an unforeseen opportunity for code. Because in the 1980s and the early 1990s, Africa was undergoing a wave of democratization, and elections were being held for the first time in many places. Well, elections require ballots to be printed, which requires printing presses and paper, and code had them, and a way of getting them active on the ground in many countries. So beyond the printing of ballots, elections also need ballots to be transported to polling station, and then after the election, the cast ballots to be brought back to the counting places. And code had or could develop these capabilities. And they found themselves in the business of being suppliers to elections, suppliers of ballots and transportation services. So they formed a sister organization, which they called Code Incorporated, which ran elections for fees and returned the profits to the charity Code as donations. So Code for 30 years, the CEO at Code for 30 years, and the fellow who was the innovator in this was Bob Dick, and in my opinion, a real entrepreneur, unidentified as such in our normal narrative, but and a developer of what I think was probably one of the first great social enterprises. So I think I'll leave it there, David.
That's just great, interesting, and I'm going to ask Val to speak in a moment. But the idea that somehow innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship is not simply the purview of the private sector, close quote. That's a really, really powerful thing, because mostly that's the kind of discussion you hear. And I noted when you talked about CJRT, which I participated in, it also was very innovative in that it produced for rural and remote areas, you could get a diploma through CJRT. Yeah. I mean, it's not, anyway, I'll cut this out and go to our guests. That'd be a good thing to do. Valerie, please tell us about the future and the DMZ.
About the future. Well, number one is I wanted to say that not only am I the executive director of the DMZ, the Digital Media Zone, but I'm also a founder. And I say it that way because the Digital Media Zone is a startup. We're acting like a startup. We started because of the vision, as you heard from Sheldon, that there is a need to help our entrepreneurs, our talent from our city. And so the whole idea of the zone came about because our students and our alumni were telling us, can you help us? Asking Sheldon, asking the university, can you help us create the companies of the future? We're already doing it. We just need a little bit of help. And so why wouldn't we do this? And that's the whole vision that Sheldon had. And what he did was he took that vision and he put it right in the heart of the city, right in the very busiest corner at Dundas Square, so everybody could see what we were doing as we were evolving, learning as we were learning, and we were sharing that learning with everybody. What was amazing about this, and as a startup it was quite amazing, that within 3 months that we opened the doors, not only did we have Ryerson students and alumni in there, we started with about 40 people, we suddenly had so many people applying that were part of the city, that were coming from all different other types of universities, people who had already been in the workforce for 15 years, asking to come into the zone with their company. So we knew that there was a need for this. And when you have a need, you can build an organization. I don't want to call it a business because, of course, we're an organization where we're trying to help companies grow. But know that we're an experiential learning environment as well, that we are learning as we are enabling innovators and entrepreneurs. And we are iterative as we are creating this. So now if I fast forward to 3 years, because we've now been around for 3 years, we are now growing exponentially. We have quadrupled in size. We now have, Sheldon was saying, is over 40,000 square feet. At the present time, we're helping about 290 innovators. We're going to be moving to helping about 450 by the end of the year. And that's amazing. So we're scaling. So we're also experiencing what that's like as we're creating an environment. Now, why is that important for everything that we're talking about here? We're talking about how we can collaborate better. Believe me that every one of myself and the entrepreneurs that I work with, I have an amazing team of people, are going out, reaching out to our community so that we can cross-pollinate and collaborate with one another. We believe that our companies can learn from one another and by working together, by clustering together. What we found is, and I've been saying this lately because I think it's very, very true, that there are no losers in entrepreneurship. And here's what I mean. Yes, you hear the stories that you fail fast, there's lots of failures, and that's true, that companies fail, but the people don't, because when you're an entrepreneur, basically you're learning as you go. If your business fails, and you fail quickly, so when it fails, you've learned a great deal. And you have an ecosystem right around Toronto, right around Ontario actually, that is going to help you to now grow either another business, or you become that much more valuable because you've had the experience of working with other companies. Now, if you think about the types of companies that are in the DMZ, DMZ is a bit of a misnomer because it says digital media zone. We're actually about digital. We have companies from every sector that you can possibly imagine. And it includes commerce, and it includes health and wellness, and it includes gaming and entertainment and education and transportation. We have brilliant people like Hossein, who has this amazing company called Flybits that's just taking the world by storm. We have another company called Hitsend that has a product called Soapbox that's being used by Indigo and also being used by Justin Trudeau. Why is that product so important? What kind of impact is that having on our society? Well, it's enabling people to get the voices up so that we can actually act on what people would like to see happen. That's amazing. That's also highly collaborative. That means that more and more people are working together to create a better world. It's a very, very positive environment that we live in. Now, this other thing that's going on in the digital media zone is that now that we've proven that there's a model that works, we are growing companies. Now zones are popping up all over Ryerson. I see Dan in the audience from Q, from our Center of Urban Energy. And what's awesome about there, now we're concentrating, we have a vertical concentration, a focus on urban energy, and it is now growing in leaps and bounds. And what's wonderful is that we have all of these companies that are talking with one another and learning from one another and sharing with one another, whether to make a company, you have all different types of disciplines. You have the business side, you have the deep subject matter skills, you've got technology, you've got user experience, you've got content creation. It's actually a bit of a phenomena. Now, instead of really dog-eat-dog type of a world where you're competing and it's you against everybody else, now what we're finding is it's actually the combination of skills together that are going to make a stronger world. I could really go on about this because I'm quite passionate about it, but I see the beginnings that things are really starting to happen, and it's really happening in Canada, where our talent is starting to work with one another. And we've had companies actually go to Silicon Valley for a while, then they come back. And what they do is they come back and they share with themselves because they want to live in Canada. We need to do everything possible to support all of these wonderful young people, and we can by giving them a very fertile ground in order to grow their companies. Thank you.
That's great. Well done. Well done. Tim, could I ask you to tell us what you've been doing?
Sure.
Because
I'm going to stand up because I brought a little PowerPoint with me.
Okay.
As everyone in this panel will know, I never miss an opportunity to promote an Artscape project, and I brought a little story to tell you. How many people in the audience know Artscape? Great. People have been to Artscape Witchwood Barns, maybe stopped by our place at the distillery. Anyone been to our new place in Regent Park called Daniel Spectrum? Well, listen, you've got to go. It's a fantastic new place. It opened in September. Today, I'm here actually not really to talk so much about Artscape, although I will sort of, if I can figure this out, say that we're a not-for-profit urban development organization that makes space for creativity and transforms communities. We've developed and are currently operating 9 different locations across the city And in addition to providing affordable space for the people who work and often also live in these places, these projects have been important catalysts for the revitalization or regeneration of the communities that they're part of. So we've played a big role in the emergence of West Queen West as an epicenter of contemporary art in Canada. We're a development partner and anchor tenant in the Distillery District. We have a great place on Toronto Island. Check us out online at www.torontoartscape.org, and you can find out all kinds of great things about what we do in the city. Today, really, I wanted to talk really briefly about a new project that we're working on called Artscape Launchpad, and it's kind of evolved out of our interest in how do we actually create the conditions for the communities that we're creating to really thrive, and it's very central to the conversation that we've been having. And one of the things that's often celebrated about the culture and creative sector in Toronto is the contribution it makes to not only the vitality of the city, but also the economy of the city, generating $11 billion in GDP and almost employing 8% of our total workforce, which is pretty impressive numbers. And while that sounds really impressive, it's kind of masking an underlying challenge that we have in our sector, that the average incomes for many of the people who are making and generating expressive content, the artists, the designers, young creative entrepreneurs, is very, very low, certainly below the average incomes at just around $23,000. That's a national average. And yet, the people who find themselves in these professions are very highly educated. So it's a real conundrum that we've got with the culture and creative sector. It's a part of the economy that's really dominated by small businesses. And the thing that's really astounding is that almost 40% of people in the cultural creative sector are self-employed. So we've got cohort after cohort of young people graduating from colleges and universities and applied arts and design programs, often into a world that is 40% self-employed, and usually without a lot of the skills that they require to help make their way in the world. We've done a pretty deep dive, working in partnership with others, to try and unpack what's going on here. What are the barriers for cultural and creative folks to engage in kind of entrepreneurship? Why aren't they enrolling at Rotman or Schulich or at Ryerson in Ken Jones's program? And part of it is a right brain kind of thing, if you know what I mean. People who are kind of, I'm not going to read each slide here, but people who are oriented differently. And so as a result of this, sort of I think for our sector, there's weak enrollment in traditional business programs. People tend to focus on the creation of their art or their design practice rather than on the business development. We've grown a forest of organizations that are about supporting the culture and creative sector, with more than 90 plus of these organizations in the GTA alone. And all of this leads, I think, to diminished aspirations for people who are really highly trained in the cultural and creative world. So what we're trying to do with the new Artscape Launchpad project is to try to bring a bit of balance to the right brain and left brain approach to this thing, promoting business acumen and the acquisition of business acumen as a way to empower and free people who are sort of working in these areas. And it's about coordinating the efforts of industry, of education, of trade and service organizations, and certainly the private sector, because we think there's a whole lot of unrealized potential in this area. So really it's about doing a bunch of different things. It's about helping young people reduce underemployment. It's about helping young people make the transition from post-secondary to self-employment. It's about raising workers' incomes. It's about generating new companies and connecting creative people and ideas to the marketplace. So how are we going to do all of this? And this simple diagram is our attempt to describe what we're trying to create under one roof. Think of this sort of as kind of like a health club, except instead of having elliptical machines and treadmills and weight training, you'll have different sort of artistic studios that might be outfitted in one area with digital media equipment and 3D printers and design software. You'll have a carpentry shop, a jewelry making shop, textiles areas, kind of multidisciplinary production studio that people have access to all these kind of tools of the trade that often they can't afford on their own. And at the center of this program is an entrepreneurship program that we're developing and will be delivering in partnership with colleges and universities and trade and service organizations. Here are some of the partners that we've been working with, all of the major GTA colleges and universities, as well as Work and Culture and some of the important trade and service organizations. So really, this is about looking into this part of the sector, which is an important employer, sort of an important generator of wealth in our city, and figuring out how do we ramp it up? How do we work in partnership with what Val is doing, sort of at DMZ and others across the city, so that the creative entrepreneurs, the artists and designers can add so much more to the life of the city. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tim. Terrific. I'm going to ask some questions to the panelists, and they may want to ask one another questions or offer some thoughts, and then we'll come to you. I should mention, by the way, that we did have a fourth panelist, and that was Bob DeLuce, who of course is with Porter Airline, and he's doing some real entrepreneuring work right now. I talked to him this morning, and he said he would be here, but he, of course, had his case with the airport before the city council. And he called just before we started saying, I have to do a little entrepreneuring over at city council, so that's why he's not with us. What was interesting, I'm sure interesting to you, but it caught me, is that the question is, what more should we be doing to encourage a culture of entrepreneurship? What I heard was that that wasn't what was uppermost in people's minds. Val, for example, said she was just desperately trying to serve a need from her students. And I wondered what you actually thought of the way in which we phrased the question. Should we be doing more? Are there people out there that don't need to be encouraged, they just need to be assisted? Or how do you, Val?
I think it's both. I think that number one is recognize people who are already doing it and need a leg up and need help. So that's the first thing. And if you start there, it's interesting because they'll actually give you answers to help others. The other thing is encouragement of those who are on the fence with entrepreneurship. Being an entrepreneur is difficult. It is difficult because it's risky. So how do you take some of that risk out so that you can pursue, have a little bit of a safety net, so then you can pursue again if your idea doesn't work. It's a different way of thinking. I can tell you that, now I'll talk about my generation. I have a lot of people who have lost their jobs, especially in media, because a lot of my friends are in media. What they have to do is now reinvent themselves and apply their wonderful skills in writing or filmmaking or television in a different way. And they're just starting to do that. But they would never have thought to become entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship, I think, especially now, is starting to bubble up because of the need, because we need new strategies, new economic strategies, new ways of approaching things, new answers, new business models for us to be able to thrive. So, and in order to do that, you have to try. You got to try it, because no one really has an exact answer of how it's going to work.
Okay. Alan, one of the great projects of the Maytree Foundation is the work you've done with immigrants and immigrant needs. It used to be said that you didn't have to teach immigrants that they wanted to be small business people, they really wanted to get going and look after themselves and their families and so on. I just wondered, out of the experience you've had, our increasingly stronger immigrant world in Toronto, that's helping a sense of entrepreneurship, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think you know, the nature of the immigrants we get in Canada, because of our selection system, our point system by which people get, you know, points for you know, their business skills, their language skills, their kind of their markers of success that they've had in their country of origin, and it means a lot of these people. First of all, there's no motivational issues. You've got to be pretty motivated to get up and move halfway around the world. But a lot of them come with business skills, and their issue really is trying to connect into local networks. And so, as you know, some of the programs we have are mentorship programs that pair up an appropriate, a business-appropriate mentor-mentee relationship, So if a pharmacist comes, we link them up with a Canadian pharmacist, civil engineer with a civil engineer, that kind of thing. So that's the challenge with immigrants is not so much to skill building and giving skills, but it's really in making the connections to the networks of influence and association that exist in Canada. The other piece which I was going to ask Tim this question around what they're doing with this most recent program, is that a lot of people who have entrepreneurial ambitions and aspirations lack some of the basic either business skills or financial skills. And so that's where in my life as a venture capitalist, that's where we've seen most of the kind of failure, is that they know their product or their service, they're pretty good on their technology or whatever. Where they fall down is their ability to raise capital, and then once they have capital, to marshal it and monitor it appropriately. And so whether, Tim, in your program, for example, there is, or Valerie, yours as well, whether there is, as part of that, kind of basic business skills, and I'm particularly worried and interested in the financial skills part of it, both on the capital raising part, but also the management of it.
It's one of the reasons that we're sort of going ahead with this Launchpad project, is that we've recognized that, as you've just noted, that it's not a lack of motivation. I mean, people are so passionate. We did a poll of the people who work and live in artscape buildings, and 25% of them had postgraduate degrees. They've been so incredibly invested in their artistic practices. They're passionate about sort of pursuing this career, but they're also lost when it comes to some of these basic kind of financial skills and financial planning, and as you noted, how to kind of marshal capital and sort of put it to use. So that's really at the core of what we're trying to do, is to bring those two things together, so that people who've got an idea sort of can figure out how to get it to the marketplace, whether it's direct to the marketplaces or it's through their business to another business, which is another sort of important part of the sector. There's a growing creative industry in the city that's, whether it's digital media, whether it's the music business, the film business, people, it's very complicated for people to figure out how to plug into all of those kind of industries, and they're often a sole trader, sort of, it's kind of a David and Goliath relationship. So figuring out how to navigate those relationships is equally important, I think, for the work that we want to do with the Launchpad project.
Well?
Yeah, at the Digital Media Zone, it happened after being open for about 9 months, we realized where the best value was for the entrepreneurs was actually to bring in potential customers. And so now we're at a point where we've attracted enough attention that we have over 100 people coming through the DMZ every week. And we introduce the Digital Media Zone companies to those potential customers. And what they do is they pitch, they listen to what the visitors have to say, because visitors will say, oh, I could use that in this particular way. You hadn't thought about that already. And they always ask, what's your business model? How can I work with you? How much is it going to cost me? What do you mean? What do you mean you haven't figured that out yet? Those kinds of conversations happen every day. And what's happened is the zone members, people who are the entrepreneurs who are in there, pick it up right away, because they can't survive unless they come up with the business models, unless they can be able to get the customers. So that's where we now are putting our focus, is on getting customers or potential customers through.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that struck me as well, as I heard all three of you, but certainly you, Tim, when your own projects, the entrepreneurship and the new digital universe that we're engaged in trying to understand and exploit, doesn't often meet up with, or at least in the popular mind, meet up with how do you solve social issues and social problems. They're usually business, economic development, those kinds of things. And yet I know, Tim, tonight you're going to be at a fundraiser for Sketch, which is a great organization. And what I'd like you to do is actually tell people about it, because it's got to do with the Shaw Street project, which you started. But it's one in which you bring together all of these skills we're talking about for the solution to social issues. And it just struck me as a really healthy dimension.
Yeah, you know, it's one of the things I think Alan was talking about is that there's a whole world of social enterprise, sort of, which is about taking an entrepreneurial approach to solving social problems. And I think you're right that Sketch is a wonderful, probably one of Canada's best examples of an organization that does that incredibly well. The Sketch is set up to work with at-risk and homeless youth, literally people who are street involved, sometimes gang involved, and they use art as a platform to engage them, to build their life skills, and to get them reintegrated into society in a more productive way. And they've done it so brilliantly over so many years that they're sort of really, I think, one of the world's best examples of how you can actually engage art as a learning tool to help to do all of that. And we're thrilled that they're going to be one of our new anchor tenants at the Artscape Young Place project, which is an old school that we're renovating in the west end of the city. And tonight we're going to be helping to raise some funds to make all that happen.
Yeah, and, well, and the school itself, I think now is full, right? We've got, yes. And they've renovated a lovely old Shaw Street School, and Sketch will be in the bottom. The only reason I mention it is that these social dimensions are, to me at any rate, fresh approaches to some very, very old, almost unsolvable problems. So that's why it was pretty impressive.
Well, and they go to what John was saying in his talk too about when you're trying to create magnets for people to come here. These are things that contribute to lively, livable places, right. And help deal with some of the social issues that, you know, if they go unlooked after, untended, somebody who's choosing between here and Boston as a place to go and work might cause them to say, well, that's a troubled city, I don't think I'll go there. So when you think about entrepreneurship and the creation of value, we very often think just about the financial right. wealth that is being created, but there's a whole bunch of social wealth and community wealth that really matters as well.
Right. Yeah. All three of you have been involved in this effort for some time. I did ask whether or not you need to encourage people, and the answer was probably not. You just need to help them get rid of the barriers that are in front of them. But I wonder if there's anything that you think that colleges and universities could do that they're not doing now, particularly business schools or management schools. What could they be doing now? Is there an accessibility issue for people where they need to learn the skills, but they don't have all of the stepping stones that they should have done earlier in life? Are those kinds of issues? I just wonder what you think Ken Jones could fruitfully spend his time and his colleagues on turning this new idea into something useful for the city.
I love that question. I love that question because I think that business acumen should be with you all the time. And I actually think it should be with you before you even come to university. I think it should just be part of how you live. I think it's very, very important for social enterprise, for social innovation, because basically you have to be able to know how to get your idea out there and to keep it thriving and keep iterating so that it continues to be impactful. And I think that I'm making a general statement, but I'm just going by my own education. I always expected that whatever I did, if I did it very well, I'd reap the rewards and I'd have the impact that I wanted. That's just not true. There are so many things about how we're a society now that through digital, we're connected in ways that we never were before. We need to take advantage of the digital age, understand how we can connect not only with each other locally, but I also think worldwide. I think that that's the impact that we can possibly have on each other, and know how we can get ourselves out there and utilize our own skills in the best possible way. And I believe that can be taught in schools. As I have grandchildren, I want them to have this when they enter into school.
Tim?
Yeah, I mean, we've studied this issue with respect to the creative and cultural sector, and I think that if we had a panel of colleges and university deans here, they would all agree that everyone's working harder on this, and they recognize that sort of, particularly the people who are graduating in fine arts with fine arts degrees, do not have enough of the kind of business sort of training that they need in order to survive in the world. And so that's all really good, and I think it's great that colleges and universities are pushing the boundaries there. But having said that, when it comes to being an entrepreneur, a lot of it is learning as you go. And you can't really, like, if you're starting a business, you can't kind of really think back to what you learned 4 years ago about setting something up. You need an environment that's going to actually support you as you're going through that process. And you need to learn, you need to fail, as Valerie has said, and you need to kind of iterate constantly. So, you know, I think it's important that we continue to create these little enclaves like DMZ, like Launchpad, that will actually provide the kind of supportive environment. And where a lot of the richness comes from is from the interaction, the interplay of the people and ideas in these places. And I think that's what we've learned, or, you know, that's where the real wealth comes from, is the new ideas that kind of happen, you know, over the water cooler chat, or the kind of the people who might just have not otherwise met each other kind of bump into each other in these kinds of spaces.
But don't you think that could happen also in high schools, and because the ideas are there, it's knowing that you can act on them. So I'm so with you on your point of it's about the support. So it's not first knowing that you can do it, and number two is the support as you're doing it, so that you can continually iterate.
So the DMZ is not just about a digital world, it's about how people are going to be able to look after their lives in a way that is a different form of learning, I guess.
Yeah,
Is it a different kind of
it's
learning?
a different form. Yeah. It's adding on to current learning, but I think it's opening the whole experience up. Because now, in digital, you actually can get information from everywhere. We all do. And we have multiple devices. We also have people at our fingertips that we never did before. And we also have ways of collaborating and bringing together when you need it, just in time learning, just-in-time collaboration. This is now available like it's never been before. And quite frankly, we haven't figured out all the models on how to work. So it's a constant learning so that we can figure it out. And I'm forgetting, it was John who said that we can never stop. You can't stay still. You can't be stagnant. You have to continually, you can't rest on your laurels. Or Ken, maybe you said that too. You have to continually move because things are going to change, and I believe they will forevermore.
One of the things you talked about earlier was the element of risk in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial behavior. And again, to support your idea of having some kind of financial literacy starting very early in the education system, because I think that's the biggest kind of unknown for most people who get into businesses. Who are, whether they're innovators around a service or a good or whatever it is, it's the real piece that they typically don't have enough knowledge of is the whole finance piece, and therefore that becomes the biggest risk for them. It's the big unknown. It's a big risk, and it's actually a big enough risk for a lot of people that they'll not go far enough or not undertake something, because they just don't understand, they don't have enough knowledge to understand how that risk fits into a risk matrix and how far they can go, what they can do. So I would think I agree with you, Valerie, it's something that's got to go much further, start much earlier in that
secondary
education
school?
system.
That should be in the,
Yeah,
should be in high school?
or even earlier. I mean, we learn to count our change, that's about it in schools,
okay.
And we don't learn much about risk return and that kind of balance. And I love this idea that you can deliver some of these things in a just-in-time way, but that to me is more of a bedrock kind of piece that needs to be there. Also just make the observation that it's a rare post-secondary institution, particularly a university, that can be as nimble as they are in the digital media zone, and just in time in a normal university environment's a decade or so.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, absolutely. I think there's probably, I don't have my watch, but I think there are, I'm sure, lots of questions that many of you would like to direct to our panelists, or some comments you'd like to make. Please, there's a microphone in the middle here. Would you like to come over?
Some on the edges too, I think.
Sorry? So, yeah, if you just use the time-honored Canadian system of lining up, I really appreciate that. And that good-looking young man going up the stairs will help you out.
He's already gone.
He's already. Oh, I was talking about you.
Oh,
Sorry. Please go ahead,
thank
sir.
you. Thank you, Your Worship. You're still my worship, actually, you know, after all these years. I hope you'll permit me to make this a little bit of a bold sort of conversation because this is a conference, so hopefully if I put our leaders in the room a little bit on the spot, you will allow me to do that. Because I've spent a bit of my life being an entrepreneur in this town as a new immigrant as I came to Toronto 37 years ago. And I had the good fortune to build a bank from scratch in this town and had helped a number of other companies. The point I'll make is really three things. The first point I'll make is that we need to create a culture, a national culture of entrepreneurship. So I believe that the conversation we're having, and Mr. Mayor, you touched upon that briefly. What should we do before we get to a point of establishing a company or a DMZ, for example? I think it starts with telling our young children to start developing an affinity for mathematics and science and having science fairs in the city and in the country and elevate that whole aspect a little bit higher than what we have today. I think so that's one aspect. The second aspect is there's a whole culture. Again, building on that culture, I think we need to have a culture of people who are givers and not just takers. And what I mean by that is, and I think Tim in his presentation had this aspect of having a peer group platform where you're sharing ideas and you're challenging one another, and that does not exist. And the third point I will make is that the institutions we have today, whether it's DMZ or it's Mars and it's all the other trade associations, their performance matrix is all messed up, quite frankly. They're not measuring the right things, where the money has been deployed. I think we have to stop thinking in terms of whether we have taken up so many, 100,000 square feet or so many companies, but we should start measuring ourselves and saying how many people have gone public, how much fundraising has been done, and have we put our big banks on the spot, for example. We have such an incredible...
Always a fun.
I remember visiting DMZ a few years ago, and there was a whole effort about creating the private equity fund for those entrepreneurs who are in the DMZ. Now, I don't know what progress was made, but the fact is, I think our banks are known worldwide. We have largest private equity funds in this country and located in this city. And I think we have to start elevating this and start challenging the system to say, can they be, even to the extent if you have to legislate it, say, can you put 1% of your profits, not very much, just set aside 1% of your profits in creating private equity funds for institutions like this. So those are the few points I wanted to make.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi there. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you to all the panel. And my question is to Valerie. And first off, great piece on the CBC this morning. It was really informative. And I wanted you to describe some of the cross-sector collaboration that you've seen be very successful at the DMZ, particularly, you mentioned different sectors working together. When we think outside of the sector silo of telecommunications, banking, or how we traditionally think about sectors.
Okay, I hadn't really thought about that. When you first started talking, I was thinking about a number of companies that had cross-pollinated with each other and started to use each other's types of softwares and hardware and services. How are they? They're kind of naturally doing that. And what I mean is that the communications sector is working with the art sector, meaning creative arts sector. I'm thinking, for instance, because your question is an interesting one. I was thinking about, we had a company in the zone that was called Creative Room. It actually came from Israel. We have a number of companies that are coming from other countries that come into the zone for a number of months to kind of share with us. What Creative Room did was, from a film industry perspective, what they did was they were crowdsourcing the ability to create films. What they would do is create reels, just a segment of what the film could look like, so that producers could look at it and crowds could have an idea of how this film would play out and whether they liked it or not. And the best films would rise to the top, and what they were looking for was investment. They were looking for film producers to take it on, to actually create it. They were looking for the creators of that film, and they were using different types of communications to make it happen. So I guess that's what I mean. You're kind of crossing over all the different sectors to enable someone to actually create a business and make it prosper. I'm not quite sure if I answered your question. I hope I did. But it really is a mindset of what are you trying to get out there, and then how do you combine the very best of what's going on from a distribution perspective.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, there was some discussion about immigration, so my question is perhaps towards Mr. Broadbent or Mr. Farrow, and Your Honor, Mr. Crombie as well. And just a simple question, can we innovate, can we have an innovative economy and sustain that if we're not supporting the secondary industries, so skilled trades or industry or manufacturing? As I know, I'm an alumni of Ryerson, and there's a lot of building going on. Do we have the infrastructure to lay that in place to support the innovative economy that we want to create?
Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, our immigration policy tends to favor skilled immigrants, and a lot of the kind of program support tends to go into that. There are some indications. I kind of agree. If you were making a point, I think I agree with your point. And there is some interest now in the labor movement to kind of become innovators themselves in the whole area of bringing immigrant labor in and into the organized labor movement in a more kind of purposeful way than they have been before, and a lot of interest in, and I'm going to forget the community impact of various projects, so there's a lot of very active discussions going on around the building of the Union Pearson Rail Link about the community impact that will take place along that when there's construction of the lines and the stations and the various bits of infrastructure that go along with it, how the people who live in those communities are going to be involved in the actual jobs produced and the work that there is to do, what kind of training needs to be done to bring them up to working standards, and the unions are very active in that, as well as a number of other community partners. So there is, and those areas tend to, like most neighborhoods in Toronto, tend to be immigrant rich, and so there is some movement in that direction, but it's not anything kind of comprehensive and large scale that I've seen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for sharing so many wonderful ideas and visions. My name is Dan, and I'm a MBA student at Ryerson University, and I'm now working on my graduation thesis on university incubators. So what you have discussed are really interesting to me. I'm particularly curious about what Val mentioned at the CBC interview, and also just now, that some students went to Silicon Valley and still came back. So what do you think that we could draw them back to Toronto and to Ryerson University? In other words, what kind of advantages Ryerson University has or Toronto has compared with, Silicon Valley, such a big competitor over the world, and also have so many years of innovation experiences there. So what are our strengths and also challenges, both for our university and for the city? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. So the companies that have been going down to Silicon Valley, when they go there, it's a wonderful place, because when you even go into a coffee shop, you're going to run into somebody who would be very interested in hearing your story and might be there to help finance you or help you in particular ways. It's very intense when you go, and it is quite an exciting environment to be in. Why do they come back is because, number one is, and these are only the stories that I have because they're companies that were in the DMZ at first, is number one is that they were already part of the DMZ community and the Toronto community, and they wanted to be part of it. So when they went there to gain the knowledge and to make the contacts and then to bring all that back to the DMZ, which was awesome because then they shared, of course, with all of the other digital media zone members. And it created more excitement and more learning, and this enabled more people to thrive within our environment. I think that I'm hearing too that in Silicon Valley, talent is very, very expensive. And interestingly enough, in Toronto, we have so much talent here, and it's not as expensive. And so what we need to do is actually what we're hoping is going to happen is that our entrepreneurs are going to be very, very successful. And as they're being successful, they give back to the entrepreneurial community so that new entrepreneurs can also thrive. And we're starting to see that happen already. And we're seeing that with organizations like the C100, who are giving back to the Canadian entrepreneurial community with not only their expertise, but with their investments as well.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Shanta Nathwani, and I'm an alumni of the university here at ITM. You mentioned about how all the different industries, artists especially, need to learn about various finances and business and those types of different acumen. I have figured out I am not an artist, okay? So my point being is that we can't all necessarily be everything. We can't all know everything. So would it not be a better thing to say that we need these spaces not only where artists can learn about business, or that artists can learn about finance, or digital media people can learn about those types of things, but maybe where businesses can learn about those other industries, and where they can partner together and say, hey, you have the business knowledge, you have the artist or the creativity, let's put these things together and make those things happen. And I think that is where what is lacking, at least for myself, is I go to, I don't know how many meetups a week, just so I can meet other businesses and figure out what they're missing. As a web designer and as an instructor in web design, this is where I tell my students to go. Where else can we tell them to go?
Thank you for making that point. I think it's a really important one. I mean, despite your frustration, I think that Toronto has done enormous things. I see Mike Williams over here, who's the city's general manager of economic development. He's been actively promoting the development of incubators across the city. And I think that there's probably, I can't think of another city in the world that's got more going on this front than is happening here in Toronto. When you consider what not only Mars, sort of in DMZ, but the Center for Social Innovation, what Evergreen did at the Brickworks, what we've done across the city. I mean, there's just what the colleges and universities are doing in this space. There is a proliferation of this kind of meetup space, and some of it is kind of entrepreneurship focused. Not all of it is, though. I agree with you. Not everybody's an entrepreneur. They're not, right? Not every artist is an entrepreneur. And some artists need to hook up with an agent who can plug them into the business world. I think that's perfectly, but what we're trying to focus on this, with our particular project, are for those who are the entrepreneurs, and how do we support those people. But I think, you know, to the first comment, that we can't rest on our laurels. If we're leading in this field internationally, we should accelerate it so that we continue to be at the head of the pack.
Thank you for the distinction. It definitely helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello. I think my question is addressed to Mrs. Fox and Mr. Jones, mostly. I'm from the Netherlands. I work for the Dutch consulate here. And it's actually twofold. I am really interested in international entrepreneurship and innovation. And I was wondering, for the spaces you create to facilitate or foster this entrepreneurial spirit people have, do you look at international examples, like best practices? And secondly, people who have an interesting startup, do you also help them broaden their horizon internationally as well? So going overseas or wherever.
Okay. So last year, we started to talk to the different IITs in India. This is where the top 5% technical students go. And we invited them to come to the DMZ, those people who had business ideas and who were starting companies. It was an experiment. We weren't sure how it was going to go because the Digital Media Zone was very, very much interested. Ryerson was very much interested in creating a bridge into the international areas so that we could learn more about being international and see what happened. Well, it was phenomenal. We've had 6 different companies come in from India and 2 from Israel. I had just given you an example of the Israeli ones. And then we're having some companies coming in from China. And we're actually opening up the doors to other companies throughout the world. Why was it so successful? Because wonderfully, not only did so the companies from India, how they thrived, is they came in with technical ideas that they thought were good ideas, and they had a couple of customers. Because the Digital Media Zone really puts a wrapper on user experience and business, they were able to, in that 4 months that they were there, take their business from here to here. And so when they went back to India, all of a sudden their business was just that much more solid, and they were able to do that much more by the time that they got there. So that was a great learning for them. For us, it was an amazing learning because we got to see things through another culture's eyes. And we got to see that when we're creating things, you don't just create things for North America. You start to think about other cultures and you utilize them. And then something remarkable happened was that one company that came, a woman came up with this company called That's So Gloss. It was actually a teenage digital magazine for women. And she partnered with another company in the Digital Media Zone called Aha Moments, and they formed yet another company. And that's been quite exciting for us because now we have an international company right then and there. So it's been a great experience, and because of that, we're now opening our doors to even more to see how that's going to pan out. Thank you.
For our part,
sorry, go ahead.
For our part, we've done a couple of studies, and if people are interested in them, I'd be happy to share them with you. One on sort of creative convergence and this emergent forms of infrastructure that are intentionally designed to facilitate collaboration leading to innovation. So, and Toronto has a wealth of those kinds of examples of projects that are doing that. And we've also looked internationally at who's taking a sector-specific approach to creative sector sort of entrepreneurship, and what can we learn and how can we tailor that for sort of a specific Toronto experience. So I'd be happy to share those with you if you're interested. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. The powers that be are telling me that I have 1 minute left, which gives you 20 seconds each and 10 seconds for each one.
Wow. Okay, quick one. Thank you very much for the wonderful exchange of ideas. I manage a market entry strategy company which works with Canadian and US companies expand into India or the Middle East. One area and observation that I have about promoting a culture of entrepreneurship while observing different companies from different markets is that we possibly have to foster a culture and promote the urge to dare in the Canadian context. And I wonder whether you have any ideas and experiences, and especially as a university, how do you bring the culture of daring to business, to individuals who want to be entrepreneurs? Because I believe that is a critical need for promoting entrepreneurship here in Canada. Any thoughts, please?
Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Well, I would just unfortunately repeat something I said earlier. Part of the unwillingness to dare is the kind of financial fright. And to make finance more visible and make it a more understood piece of the risk matrix, I think liberates a lot more people to try things.
Thank you. Sorry, please go ahead.
Just a comment, just from an educational perspective, that actually that dare, that risk, that we see it too with our students who have become entrepreneurs. The learning, if I can look at it from a learning perspective, is unbelievable when you have your own money on the line and you put your own passion and drive on the line. So I actually just think that that's something that it's instilling it in a culture, and that education could come way before university.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. You have the final question, sir.
I never thought I'd ever make it to Ryerson University because Mom and Dad were always too poor to put us in university, but I did go to Humber College, honors background, and media and creativity. But what I'm here for is to touch on one thing that I think touches all of us here. Everybody's talking about community, but it is really poverty. one thing that I've discovered, I'm a volunteer on a regular basis every Monday at the Daily Bread Food Bank here in South Etobicoke, and with another great organization called Bright to Play as a fundraiser. Last night we almost broke a record at the Leafs game with the 50-50 draw of almost $20,000. That was all just with volunteers. But my question to the panel, maybe more of the Alan and the gentleman on the end, is how do we take individuals, families alone, with a son or a daughter who is suffering from a severe disability, who has the ability to be creative, to be innovative, and to be an entrepreneur, to get them to that next level, but mom comes into the Daily Bread Food Bank because of a disability and cannot afford to put her child through education and training. But I see this individual on a regular basis. I see it, I talk to him about it, but I just want to know from maybe all the individuals, how do we capture these young, great minds as we see them and take them to the next level? And I apologize, that is a broad question, but I like to encourage people to think.
Thank you very much.
It's a great question.
It really is good. I'll ask Alan to
Unfortunately, that's the question with the 1 hour answer. You know, it's a complex question. We don't do enough in Canada to support people with disabilities and families with a disabled family member. And I could go through income support programs. You know, the Caledon Institute of Social Policy has done a lot of very good work in this area, but it is it's a huge gap. And it actually turns out to be a business issue and an economic issue. It's not just a social issue or a do something nice issue. It's an important issue that you've raised. So I wish we had longer to talk about it. But
Well, I am not working. I am looking for work, so I have time to talk to you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Are we finished? Yeah. I appreciate the question, and as Alan points out, it takes a longer answer, but thank you for asking it, and good luck. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this part. Let me thank the panelists. It was just great. I really appreciate it very much.